je suis tellement, tellement fatigué, tellement épuisé. Oh, okay. It's like very early in the morning. Where is my notebook? What time is it? Oh my god. Boy.
Hey, Winston, I can see you now.
Oh, hold on. Um, can you say something again?
Can you hear me?
Okay, perfect. I can indeed.
Awesome. How has your week been?
Good, 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 good. It's a pretty good weekend. Um, Lots to do, but that's normal, I guess.
Yeah, it's kind of that time of year.
Hmm.
Did you have a chance to read through that thing I sent you on John Somerville?
I did actually. Well, I mean, I didn't read all of it. I got to page what page am I on? I got to page 43.
Okay,
So I'm into like chapter two, talking about nature of thought, methodology, stuff like that.
perfect, perfect. That's kind of just like I always use that reading as a sort of crash course way into thinking about some of the very large concepts that I would like to start unpacking today, um, such as dialectical materialism, Hegelian idealism, and the main sources that Marx utilized to kind of build this philosophy that we call communism, if that makes sense. I think the most important thing to get out of that reading, um, just from a quick read through, is the difference between Aristotelian thinking and Hegelian or dialectical thinking. So, Aristotelian thinking is, like I said last time with that paper analogy. Okay, A equals A does not ever equal B, and things can either be A or they can be B, but they can never be the same thing at one time. And Hegelian thought is, well, if you isolate the paper over a long enough period of time, there's factors that'll definitely change your perception as to whether or not A is always A and not becoming something else. In fact, the verb becoming is one of Hegel's like favorite words in all of German. He uses it to explain numerous concepts. I think the most rudimentary concept that he used was not a piece of paper, but rather was a flower. He said, for example, if you look at the life stages of a plant, you start with a seed, and then the seed becomes the like sprouting stem, and then the sprouting stem becomes the emerging plant, and then the plant creates a flower, and then the flower drops the seed. At each stage, there's a different expression of what this plant is at any given time, but it's all still the same plant. It's a rose bush or it's a tulip, etc. Uh, each progressive stage of the plant's life does not change the fact that it's still the same plant. So that's, I think, the easiest way to begin thinking about what I'd like to talk today. But are you ready? We're going to get into some pretty heavy philosophy this morning, and for an early 6:30 morning on a Monday, sometimes philosophy can be a little bit of an intense venture.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm ready. Yeah, I mean, I found the reading to be, especially like that first chapter, I guess describing materialism. Like, I thought that was just so incredible. I was like, um, I think it like put to words a lot of the ideas and questions that I've been sort of ruminating on for a long time. So yeah, super cool.
Good.
Yeah, let's do it.
Good. All right. Obviously, I'm going to ask questions as we go through this little lesson plan that I have set up. But feel free to like interject and stop me. If you have a specific question about anything, we're going to be going over a few things. I don't have Hegel's book here because it looks like I have Hegel's book already packed away for my move. But I do have two of the other books that I'm going to be mentioning. Adam Smith and his very famous text, The Wealth of Nations, followed by selected readings out of Karl Marx's collected works from the 1840s and 1850s. But okay, so let's get into it. So, how much do you know about this man that I've mentioned a couple times at this point, George Hegel?
Um, I don't know too much specifically. I just think I have some sort of like, I guess, like basic um, awareness of like some sort of relation between Marx and Hegel, and like there was like this other guy. Um, I think his name starts with an L or something. I don't really know, but um, yeah, just
Hmm.
like I don't know. I've heard these names mentioned together before.
So, Hegel was a teacher of philosophy at the University of Berlin and for a short period of time, another university in Munich. And Karl Marx was his student. So Karl Marx studied philosophy under the wing of George Hegel. He took all of his lectures during the 1820s and the 1830s. And this was at an era in which, if you're seeking a doctorate degree in philosophy, you're not going to get it done in 4 or 5 years. They're gonna really press you for like 11 or 12 years to produce enough stuff to convince the academy that yes, you deserve this degree. So to kind of unpack Hegel, he had a very interesting relationship with academia at the time, the 1810s, 20s, and 30s. He was kind of considered to be the godfather of Western philosophy. So if the year was 1810 and you were entering the University of Berlin with an effort to study philosophy, you would most certainly be studying under his school of thought. Even if, let's say, you wanted to go study art at the University of Berlin, you would still be studying from an art department that is under the umbrella of Hegelian philosophy. They look at art, study art, and interpret art through the lens of Hegel's dominant philosophy. That's how influential he was. Now, also, what was occurring at the time was the emerging hard sciences were becoming more and more dominant schools of thought in all colleges and universities across the world. At the time, they didn't call themselves the hard sciences. They called themselves. Do you know what the hard sciences used to be called?
It was like natural philosophy.
Natural philosophy, correct. And they based their understanding of the natural world not through a dialectical method that reasons or rationalizes out a truth. How do scientists arrive at a truth?
Is that like either deductively or inductively or something like that? Scientific method.
Scientific method, yes. So it involves both induction and deduction, and it's the scientific method, and it has to follow the scientific method pretty pretty closely, almost to the letter. Um, for example, one canon feature of a hard science like chemistry is that you cannot claim to have found the formula for creating a certain chemical unless you can recreate that experiment. Does that make sense?
Hmm.
So there's a famous example in the 1980s where two graduate students in physical chemistry, I don't remember the university actually, but they claim to have discovered cold fusion. Like our problem with energy is over. They claimed, like we have done it. We have discovered the truth to making fusion energy, in a manner that does not require more energy to contain the reaction. The whole world was stunned. And Chinese science experts, European science experts, and American science experts all came together to be like, this is amazing. This is a profound moment. Please recreate us the experiment. And they couldn't do it. Now, because they could not do it, now we could sit here and say, like, oh, well, they cheated through graduate school, or they're a bunch of, idiots or whatever. But the fact that they could not recreate that experiment means that it cannot be accepted by the scientific community. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. So a lot of these early academics in the 1820s and 30s who pressed for the hard sciences, such as physics and chemistry, etc., they used the scientific method, and it was at direct odds with the way that philosophy suggested truth can be arrived at. That is, academic philosophy. According to philosophers, truth is something that you have to rationalize and reason out. We have to sit here and talk about it back and forth, and eventually we will come to some semblance of truth. And even then, it's not going to be a whole truth. It's going to be like a half truth. You're going to have your take on something. I'm going to have my take on something. Maybe we agree on certain dimensions of the topic, but there's also probably dimensions of the topic that we disagree on. So truth, according to philosophy, is very subjective. You've got your own approach to truth. I've got my own approach to truth, et cetera, et cetera. So philosophy had dominated academia ever since Aristotle. Aristotle, in fact, created one of the very first things that we can call a university in Western civilization. And to master any particular subject was considered to be a philosopher of that school. So there's one thing that binds all these different schools together that dates back to the 1820s, and that's the highest degree that you can get in a subject. Do you know what that is?
I assume doctorate, no?
Yeah, a PhD, which stands for Doctorate of Philosophy. So if you get a PhD in chemistry, you are considered a Doctorate of Philosophy in chemistry. So you're a chemist philosopher according to the Academy. This is the same for physics, the same for art, the same for history, the same for everything like that. But Hegel did not like this. So Hegel disagreed with the effort of empirical science trying to assert that it had found the pathway to understanding truth. Hegel looks at it like, who are these younger blowhards who have, like, by their own wisdom, claimed to have come up with some formula that absolutely determines truth. Hegel dismissed this very quickly. Now, he did it for a few reasons. One, he was a God-fearing man. Hegel was a very devout Christian. And he kind of looked at these scientists going like, who are you to think that you've discovered the formula for God's natural world? Like, there's no way that you created a means of understanding God's natural world. But he's also he's a much older man. He's a tenured philosopher at two different universities. And he's looking at these younger academics who are in many ways kind of usurping the whole school of philosophy's dominance over colleges and universities. And he doesn't like it. So there's both a practical, objective reason that he doesn't like empirical science, and then there's also this personal reason of his that he does not like it. He very famously said, quote, and I have a couple of these in my notes here, who are these individuals who claim by their own personal method that they alone can determine truth? So in his perspective, regardless of the scientific method's ability to determine whether something can or cannot happen, Hegel is saying that's still just a subjective truth. So in his book Absolute Truth, which is like the subtitle of Phenomenology of Spirit, he described truth as akin to the very famous old Aesop fable of the three blind men and the elephant. Do you know that fable?
I don't.
So tell me if you... I'm going to explain the fable to you. You tell me if you think you can break down what Hegel is suggesting here. So there's a very famous fable in which three blind men go up to an elephant in the wild. And they all try to explain the elephant to each other. So they're blind, so they can't see it, but they can touch it, they can hear it, etc. One man goes up to the trunk and, like, reaches out, feels the trunk, and begins to describe, something that kind of is akin to a snake. And he describes the noise that the trunk makes, the way that it feels, the fact that it seems muscular, it can move around a lot. The other man goes up to the leg, and he just like feels the giant, massive leg of an elephant, and it doesn't feel like the trunk. It has the same skin, but it doesn't feel as like muscular, movable, and it feels much larger. And the last man goes up and he touches the tail. He's like, "This is a very small thing. Like it's attached to something larger, but this is a very small, animal that's attached to something else." What do you think Hegel was getting at there?
Like maybe like the subjective nature of reality or something like that.
Yeah. So if absolute truth exists, that's the elephant, all right? But each one of those blind men are trying kind of in vain to describe this absolute truth to each other, but they can't. There's a barrier that is preventing them from this objectivity, and that is their lack of sight. It's I guess, no little bit of coincidental irony that Hegel chose this because it's very similar to Plato's use of blindness and kind of like coming to the light that's in his allegory of the cave. So that was, Hegel's way of criticizing these empiricists. And rather than see science as a truth or the truth, I should say, not he did see it as a truth, but he didn't see it as the truth. And he'd say it's no different from a point of view, which can differ from someone else's point of view. Specifically, he said, quote, "We all subjectively relate to the one absolute truth, but no single one of us can grasp the totality of what God has created in this world."
Hmm.
So I think that kind of builds together his whole personal struggle with these empiricists, but also his leaning on Christianity and that the world is built by, a force far greater than the human mind can imagine. So this implies that yes, the hard sciences are indeed discovering things, but what they are not doing is replacing philosophy. Was the general conclusion. You get
Hmm.
that?
Yeah. I guess a couple of questions.
Okay.
So I guess one question is like, okay, so what did Hegel think about logic? What did Hegel think about mathematics? Because I feel like that's pretty like indisputable. Like if you have like a like a what is it called, soliloquy? Like if you have like a set of like premises and you have a conclusion that's pretty like airtight, like isn't that quote unquote truth? Same thing for like mathematics. And then like I guess like another question is like I'm not sure if this was during the reading, but like I'm not sure if it was Hegel, but there was somebody who was like something like these people from like Africa or like these different places were like deserving to be subjugated because they weren't like Christian or something like that. Was that Hegel or was that somebody else?
That definitely was Hegel. Hegel, as we understand him today, was a very racist, very white supremacist, and very what the word is Eurocentric. So, meaning he placed European Christian civilization at the top of the pyramid that is human development. And at the bottom of human development, he would say these are people who have no religion or polytheistic religions, and their culture is basically to just constantly be at war with each other. But we Europeans, we're above all that. Of course, we know that that's not necessarily true, but yes, that is what Hegel operated on. To answer your question about mathematics, he actually did have a comment about math. I don't remember what lecture it was in, and I definitely have to go look up to find the citation for it, but someone from a mathematics department did challenge him in a debate, and he said, and Hegel's response was to assert 1 plus 1 can absolutely equal 3. And people heard this and like, what are you talking about? Like, what in the world are you talking about? Can you guess at all what he meant by that?
No idea. No idea.
If you have a father and a mother and they come together to form a relationship, they will have a child, and the product of one and one coming together will not be two, the relationship, it will be the family, which includes the child. So he's not arguing against hard logic. What he is saying is that what you call logic can be used in different ways. You can use it to assert the scientific method, But just like with this family analogy, I can also use logic to assert subjectivity of truth. So you can't pick one or the other, is what Hegel's kind of say. You have to accept them both, or you have to reject them both. But if you pick one over the other, that's where your problem is. That's why he doesn't like these scientists, because he thinks that they are trying to place the scientific method and empirical study over and above the school of philosophy.
Okay, I mean,
Does
I
that kind of
think
answer your question?
that's a little bit more nuanced. That's interesting, I guess. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. And this is where he came up with the idea of the dialectic. So you have thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. In Hegel's mind, some just like the flower analogy, okay? The thesis is the seed. And then the seed comes across a world that is very harsh, difficult to survive in, and most certainly can kill you if you do not do something, with your existence. The seed then becomes the plant. It's the same organism, but over time it becomes something else. So the thesis that is the seed met the antithesis, which is the soil that it is placed in, and the product is a plant. That's the synthesis. If you were to remove the conditions of placing the seed into the dirt and watering it, will we get the plant?
No, I guess not.
Yeah. So that's where this thesis synthesis, formula builds itself off of. So rather than remain static and unchanging concepts, ideas, and thus the material world that is around us, shift in relationship to antagonists and opposites. Now, I decided to kind of create my own analogy here as opposed to just constantly lean on Hegel, because some of Hegel's analogy, the flower one makes sense, the paper one from Somerville makes sense, but a lot of what Hegel described only really makes sense if you live in the 1820s and 30s. So I came up with the idea of a roadblock. So imagine you're driving down the road. You have Google set up. Google's telling you, like, okay, if you want to go to your friend's house, you need to go here, turn right, and then go 4 miles, and then turn left, etc. That is your thesis, that route. Okay. What happens if Google didn't know that there's a roadblock right in the middle of that whole route? What do you do when you reach the roadblock?
You have to adjust in a moment.
Exactly. You have to change your route. Now, you can say, fuck it, and then just turn around and go home. Or you could say, well, I may not have planned this particular route, but I can turn right, maybe go take a side street, somehow get around the roadblock. The point is that the roadblock is the antithesis to your original route. And your original route, because of that roadblock, is destroyed. You can't take the thesis. You have to modify the thesis in order to either get to your destination or give up. In either choice that you make, you can't go through the roadblock. Does that make sense?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, according to Hegel, there's nothing in the annals of science that can explain this scenario. Again, this is me paraphrasing Hegel to kind of fit the scenario that I created. But he would say something like, if you were to study all the finite aspects that go into this scenario, you looked at all the matter that was involved in the road, in the car, the route, and the roadblock, what the roadblock was made of, etc. None of this is going to change the fact that you must ultimately decide to either turn around or change your route. You have to. Regardless of the outcome, your original thesis is gone. It was these kinds of scenarios that young Karl Marx was studying under Hegel. And he was listening to Hegel argue against the empirical sciences, and he was listening to Hegel create these kind of very highly extrapolated, and as you appropriately said, nuanced scenarios to try and unpack how dialectical thinking was. This is where Karl Marx molded his thought on the world. But whereas Hegel asserted that it kind of all starts with an idea, Marx turned it around and said, like, no, ideas don't come from nothing. Like, an idea is not planted in your brain by God. Ideas come from the surrounding environment that you are living in. And this is where we get into, just to make sure that. So Marx has two books that pretty much unpack this idea. The first one is called The Theses on Feuerbach. That is his dissertation. So that's what he wrote to graduate college. Followed by The German Ideology, a critique of modern German philosophy according to its representatives. So Marx asserted that social change is the product of conditions dialectically shifting over time, and that those shifts are not the product of ideas, but rather are the product of conditions upon which the ideas exist. In other words, Hegel says everything starts with an idea, Marx says everything starts with conditions. To give you an example of this, think of the invention of fire. Hegel would tell you that we don't have the means of, explaining through a lens of history how fire was invented because it was invented before people started writing stuff down. But Hegel would assert, I can tell you that fire was the product of God. Human beings were given the ability to reason and think about their situation and their needs to create heat. And as a result, they created fire. Now, based on what I've described, how do you think Marx would have accepted that?
Okay, I have so many questions.
Okay, sorry. Feel free to interrupt me, and stop me if I'm going too
I
fast.
have so
But go
many
ahead.
questions. Okay, oh man. Okay, so Hegel was a Christian. Marx was a Jew, right?
He was born Jewish, but he's probably best described as an agnostic.
Okay, so he wasn't like practicing.
I mean, he was probably as a child, but that was more likely due to like familial pressure and stuff like that.
Okay, what else? What else? Oh, well, I mean, so like he became an atheist later.
I wouldn't use the word atheist. There's nothing in any of his works that suggests he didn't believe in God.
Mm,
He does mention God a lot.
mm,
Um, so I would say agnostic or like indifferent. Like he didn't care about the differences between religions. In many ways, he would probably say religion and its various forms is no different from Hegel saying we're all subjectively relating to the absolute.
mm,
We've all got our own relationship with God. And so
mm.
I'm not going to sit here and try to argue which one's the correct one.
Um, okay, and also, I want to ask if maybe we could like review the meaning of dialectics. But I guess before that, or I guess like what would be like just a smaller question. So would Hegel like subscribe to like the idea of like perfect forms, like Platonic ideas? Um, okay, so like that idea of like fire is like some kind of like immaterial thing that has always existed as a like immaterial thing that like humans tapped into or something.
Yes, he would say like the invention of fire is a canon moment in human history because it's the point at which we discovered the category, the ideal category that is contained flame,
Mm.
which is very different from like a brush fire that is not contained, that is just spreading like crazy.
Hmm. Interesting. Okay.
So yeah, he would say those forms are important to distinguish between, but that they are fixed, and that a flame is always a flame, and an uncontrolled brush fire is always an uncontrolled brush fire.
Um, it's a, I guess a significant tangent, but like I really would like to ask about like, um, how do I put this? I mean, I don't know if I should ask like your worldview or like try to examine my own worldviews as far as like, um, perspectives on consciousness, perspectives on like materialism versus like dualism, or like what reality is, what's going on. Because I feel like that would just be like a super long conversation. I don't know.
That's the famous mind body problem that you're kind of touching on there. Have you ever heard of that phrase, the mind body problem?
I've heard of it, and then I've also heard like hard problem of consciousness and like things like that. So
Those are semi-related concepts. So the mind-body problem just refers to like the chicken or the egg scenario. What came first, ideas or the conditions which created ideas?
hmm,
Um, And this is a huge debate that Plato had with his student Aristotle. There's a famous painting of the two philosophers where they're walking through Athens, and Plato is doing this. He's like holding his hand up and he's looking to the gods and he's looking to the infinite and he's like holding this up to be the truth. Whereas Aristotle's like, yeah, that's fine and dandy, but it's far more important what is physical and real to us.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how where our ideas are coming from. They're not coming from this abstract realm of the infinite. We're building our ideas subjectively off this kind of like finite experience. That's the whole crux of the mind body problem: is where do ideas come from and where do the conditions come from, and which one of them is driving the other? Are ideas creating conditions, or are conditions creating ideas? Hegel's use of dialectics is an attempt to answer the mind body problem. Hegel is essentially asserting that a dialectic is basically an advanced form of a dialogue. So Plato would have these, in order to arrive at truth, he would have a dialogue with someone, a back and forth. You say this, I say this, we come up with this idea. I like that idea, but I don't like this part of it. So let's build off of that, and eventually, over time, come to a conclusion about some things.
Um, you mentioned the Republic, so I read a little bit of it, and I see exactly what you're talking about, like those back and forth, those long sort of like conversations. Um, was that sort of like before the advent of sort of like contemporary logic? Because I feel like there were some like logical devices that were being used, or like,
Yes, it is definitely before what we would call in Western philosophy today logic. The word logic in Plato and Aristotle's time was more referring to like mathematics, like kind of like what you were saying before. Like it's hard to argue against a principle such as 2 plus 3 equals 5. And Plato and Aristotle would say that's logical, but it's also rational because we can build it in the real world. I can take 2 stones and 3 pieces of gold and put them together, and I have 5 things. So that's how they would reason out the logic of mathematics. Prior to the arrival of the sciences, there was always this effort by people who leaned on logic and empirical study to somehow rationalize it into the umbrella of philosophy. So you had to go to these philosophers and convince them by their own school of thought that your empirical study makes sense. Um, and Hegel, is existing in an era in which academics are doing this routinely. They are constantly trying to assert their logical understanding of the empirical world as a kind of counter to the dominance that philosophy has in the college and the university. Does that make sense?
um, I yeah, that makes sense. But I mean, like, how so? Like, how would a sort of like scientific, quote unquote, scientific conclusion, I guess, like overrule like a philosophical conclusion?
So, does chemistry need God to explain the atom?
I mean, I mean, I guess it depends on how you define God. I don't know.
That's true. That's true. That's actually a very Hegelian response to that question.
Hmm.
Because a lot of scientists at the time would be like, no, we don't need God to tell you about protons and neutrons. Well, then again, I don't think they discovered protons and neutrons at that point. But like heliocentrism, for example, the fact that the Earth is not the center of the universe, the fact that the Earth is actually rotating around the sun, that is something that empirical astronomers had to convince the dominant school of philosophy in the colleges of Europe. Because
Mm,
most colleges in Europe, they're like, the Earth is the center of all existence because the Earth is God's little pet project.
mm,
And if you argue the opposite of that or you say anything different, then you have an uphill battle in terms of trying to reason this out.
mm,
And, heliocentrism did not gain traction until 200, 300 years after the first person made that observation. And how did they do it? By constantly just reaffirming their conclusions. In many ways, this is what hardened the scientific method as the means for obtaining truth by the hard sciences. You have to be able to replicate the experiment. You need your hypothesis and you need your conclusion, and those must be capable of being repeated over and over and over and over and over, never changing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I kind of just gave away a little bit of a hint there in terms of why philosophers, still exist for one, but also how they were constantly able to argue against it. If you remember way at the beginning, I said, when you were reading that Somerville reading, the big thing to get out of it is the difference between Aristotelian or static and unchanging interpretations of forms and categories versus Hegelian, which is understanding that A is always becoming something else, and things are not fixed and static. So if you think about an experiment that you can replicate over and over and over and over in order to prove that something is true, that's kind of suggesting that it's static, right?
Um.
Like the truth is fixed.
Okay. 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 Sure.
Think of gravity. Gravity falls at a rate of, what is it, 6.7 meters per second? That is a fixed observational truth. If I take an apple and I drop it right here in my room and I measure it, it will fall at 6.7 meters per second. If I take an apple to the top of Mount Everest and drop it into a cavern, it will fall at 6.7 meters per second. Every time. It will not change. Now, that makes it seem like a logically fixed value, that gravity is always set to 6.7. How can we prove that to not be true? Using science.
Um. Well, I mean, for like what they were capable of having access to back then.
No, today, right now.
Well, could you just, I don't know, go to a different planet and with like
Exactly.
hmm.
You go to the moon, and all of a sudden, the value of or the rate of gravitational pull has fundamentally changed. Now, what is it about going from Earth to the moon that causes that shift? What have we done in leaving Earth and going to the moon?
Um, it's like the different mass of the body. I think maybe.
Yeah, we have changed the conditions upon which this scientific observation is occurring. So, throwing it all the way back to Hegel here, that again, this is Hegel's big beef with the science. And he says, like, you can't claim to have come up with absolute truth when all I have to do to prove to you that your absolute truth is not such is just to change the conditions upon which you made your observations. The second I change those conditions, you have to rethink everything. You have to redo the whole experiment. So there's the kind of bounce back between the two dominant schools of thought in Western academia between the 1820s and 30s. And this combative back and forth still technically goes on to this day. That's why the mind body problem is considered the chicken or the egg scenario, because it doesn't have an answer yet. Yes, that's true. We can change the conditions and thus change the conclusions of numerous scientists. But how would the scientific community fire back at my little scenario of going to the moon? Would they tell me that I have disproven science? No. They would tell me you used science to come to that conclusion. So we admit that, yes, conditions are a major variable in how we make our observation. But what I did there with that little scenario did not break the scientific method.
Hmm.
So that's why these two groups of thought are constantly going at each other's throats.
Hmm.
Make sense?
Um, I mean, not okay. Well, I'm following what you're saying, but yeah. I mean, like a change in like sort of like environmental factors or variables that doesn't really. I mean, like some conclusion that's absolutely true given a set of variables can still be true given those variables, and they change those variables. Like, okay, so that changes the conclusion a little bit. That doesn't, you know what I mean? That doesn't. doesn't break science to use your words, but like I don't understand how that would be even like credible as any sort of objection. Like, isn't that a part of the scientific method to have some level of like rigor and like change up variables and like try again and like isn't that I don't see like a meaningful objection at some point in time in the past.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly has, by today's standards, become a dominant view of it. But when the sciences were first starting, remember how I said that the sciences had to, in order to gain credibility in academia, they had to argue to the school of philosophy and use the school of philosophy's rules in order to make a lot of their conclusions. We now live in an era in which the school of philosophy and the hard sciences, they are two different departments that in many ways don't even talk to each other anymore. So the hard sciences has, yes, accepted that material conditions do factor into all observational study. And that's part of that bounce back in the argument with philosophy. But the philosophy department today would still assert it's not an absolute truth. Just because I can measure 6.7 meters per second over and over and over and over and over on Earth does not mean it's an absolute truth. The very fact that we know that number will change once we change the conditions means that it's not absolute. And maybe I'm not being clear about what philosophy defined absolute as. Absolute, according to the school of philosophy, and to a small extent the sciences as well, is very synonymous with objective truth. So a truth that is true regardless of us even being here. So gravity, for example, its existence is an absolute truth. Einstein proved definitively that gravity exists outside of Earth, it exists between the bodies of space, and in many ways is created by the body's existence. That is an absolute. It exists everywhere. You're never going to find, or we have yet to find, maybe I shouldn't be so sure of myself, we have yet to find an area of the universe where gravity does not exist. However, gravity is subjective based on the conditions of where you're at. So there's the dualism. There's like the Descartesian dualism in that gravity both has an absolute nature to it, but it also has a subjective nature as well. It kind of depends on where you're placing your emphasis. Are you focusing on just purely the fact that gravity exists and is a thing? Or are you focused more on the specificities of gravity on the moon versus the Earth?
Let me close
That would
this
like
window.
distinguish your studies.
Um, okay, hear what you're saying, but okay. I guess a couple questions in response to that. One, have you heard of Hermeticism? What do you think about Hermeticism? And number two, I thought dualism wasn't so much about uh, the idea of like, I guess, facts and alternative facts simultaneously existing. I thought it was more so about like a reality existing behind reality or some sort of reality that's more fundamental to reality.
Yes, Descartesian dualism is very much an attempt to look at reality through the veil of Plato's Aristotelian cave, or not Aristotelian cave, cave in the Republic. Um, and Descartes would, for example, look at that painting that I described before of Plato pointing to the stars and Aristotle pointing to the ground. And Descartes would say they're both right. Like Aristotle's not wrong in emphasizing the physical world as a dominant source of our ideas and our truths. But Plato's also not wrong in that ideas and truths can come to us through reason alone. So they kind of have a feedback loop on them, is what Descartes ultimately argued, and he did so through this constant, what's the right word? Loquacious use of philosophical terminology like consciousness, pre-consciousness, post-consciousness, stuff like that. What was your question? You asked me if I knew a particular word, and it didn't ring a bell to me.
Hermeticism.
It sounds somewhat familiar, but can you give me a quick reminder?
Oh man. Like as above, so below.
Oh, as above, so below. Okay. I mean, right off the bat, it sounds like Platonic idealism to a certain extent. As above, so happens here in the material world. Um,
Kind of like the idea of like the immaterial being a reflection of the material, and the idea that they both have always existed as reflections of each other since like time immemorial, or something to that effect.
okay, yeah. That's yeah. So that's very similar to the idea of categories and forms existing coming out of our head, and those categories and forms also existing in real format here on the world, like a cup. Okay, a cup. If I were, I don't. I just showed you a cup, but imagine I didn't. Imagine I said I'm drinking coffee out of a cup. Would you need me to break down to you what the cup looks like and what it's made out of and all that sort of stuff in order for you to get what I meant?
No.
No, because the form, the category in our heads that is a cup is fixed. We understand it, we know its purpose, we know its use, etc. But me physically showing you the cup is making it clear that it's a coffee cup that's made out of ceramic and it's black and blah 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 blah. So yes, there are this semblance between the fixed categories in our idealistic realm of thought and consciousness versus the reality of those concepts in the physical world. But this is still part of the mind body problem because Hegel would say this is the product of an idea. Someone thought of a cup and then designed this and then created this as a reflection of that idea. Make sense? But Aristotle would say, yeah, but they couldn't have taken that idea and created a cup without access to ceramics, without access to the means of molding the ceramic and the means of melting all the sand and everything that's going into making that cup. If you remove those things, this physical object doesn't exist. It just remains in the abstract realm. Does that make sense?
It does. Okay, so I have some more questions. um,
Okay, that's fine. Keep in mind we're like close to the 15-minute marker here, and I did want to at least get into a little bit of the early discussion of how Marx takes this dialectic and kind of like transforms it a little bit. And I think it might answer some of your questions. But go ahead.
um, okay, I mean, like whatever you think is more appropriate, I could sort of like email you the questions afterwards. But I did want to touch on solipsism, and I did want to touch on. I mean, since you mentioned the idea of like, I guess some sort of like objection to that statement, where it's like, okay, like, what? I'm not sure how you put it just now, but like, um, the idea had to come from somewhere or something to that effect. But like, um, how does that coincide with like uh, I'm pretty sure like this idea came much later, but like the tableau, like the white tablet, like there's no such thing as like novel ideas. Like ideas are like amalgamations of previous ideas, like they like evolve or something like that.
Yeah, which itself is that's a dialectic. That's a Hegelian dialectic of the idea.
Hmm.
So, like in that sense, the cup, to use the same example, it has evolved over time. Like the cup in Roman times is different from how we conceptualize a cup today. But has the purpose and the utility of the cup changed much? Not really.
Hmm.
So the forms and the way we envision a particular idea or a category can change from culture to culture, from time period to time period, and even from person to person. But what boils down to its, I guess, similarity is its use. How is this useful for human civilization or human society? What are people going to do with this category or form in their everyday lives?
Hmm.
I guess, and like, so I described kind of like the Hegelian way of looking at it from the top down, like this category of a cup, and then I go grab the materials to make the cup, and then I manifest the cup, and then all of a sudden I've taken the idea and made it into a material reality. Um, a lot of empiricists and even Karl Marx would say, yeah, but there's a problem with saying that it starts with the idea. Because was it really an idea that caused people to create a cup? Or like why would someone create a cup in the first place?
To serve a particular need.
Bingo.
Hmm.
Where does that need come from? Does it come from an idea from God, or from like reasoning out like the abstract and sitting there pondering the universe? Or does that need come about because I need to get water from point A to point B?
Is there a way to disprove the idea of like immaterial forms or like ideas existing like sort of, you know, out there?
That is definitely a question. Is like, well, what do you think about it? In my personal opinion, no, I do not believe it is possible to destroy abstract categories. I think that to do so is kind of what a lot of authoritarian regimes throughout history have attempted to do.
Hmm.
Fascism and Nazi Germany, for example, most certainly tried to wipe out the idea that people are equal with each other. They most certainly tried to wipe out the philosophy that groups and people as a category can change their society through collective will.
Hmm.
You know, Hitler, for example, in his book, or I'm sorry, well, in his book Mein Kampf, but later in the movie that he had created, The Triumph of the Will, he says, no, 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 no. The people and the masses, they're not the reason why something occurs in society. It's because of the dedicated actions of principled individuals, people like me, great men. We are the creators of history, and we are the reason why everything around you exists. Now, we know for a fact that's not true. We know for a fact that Hitler was, building an ideology of fascism in which he was the dictator. And that, I think, kind of touches a little bit on when you mentioned that you wanted to talk about solipsism. Hitler very much was a solipsist in that he did not care if an idea or something came from the gods or came from practical necessity. He doesn't care. He cares more about the use of it. Okay, like how can this idea or thing be useful to me in the process of consolidating power? If it's not useful, then I don't need it. I can disregard it. I can get rid of Hegelian philosophy, Platonic philosophy, communist philosophy, the idea of rights that are enshrined in the American Constitution. I can rid my society of these things because they do not serve the purpose of reifying me as the center of knowledge and the center of truth. Does that make sense?
I mean, okay, I see what you're saying. I don't know. Okay, so would that be like utilitarianism or?
Yeah, it would very much be utilitarianism. Kind of like, how useful is this idea or thing to my existence? And if it's not useful, then I can just disregard it, regardless of it being true.
But that's not necessarily. That doesn't really. That's not. That doesn't necessarily like depend on solipsism or speak to solipsism, right?
Well, solipsism, however you want to pronounce it, is the kind of general philosophy that my consciousness is the center of the universe.
Right.
And if I believe that to its core, then in many ways it doesn't matter what anyone else thinks, says, or does. It matters if my consciousness accepts it. If my consciousness rejects it, then by my own solipsist views, the rest of the universe doesn't need it. That's the general gist of solipsist philosophy, which orients consciousness, self consciousness, as the dominant expression of truth. If you can reason it, it's true. But you can probably see how that could be problematic. Take, for example, slavery in the United States. Okay? Slavery was by far the most profitable enterprise that existed in the United States from the pre revolutionary era all the way up to 1865. It made more money than anything. But there's a contradiction with slavery in the United States, isn't there? It doesn't really match up to the idea of we the people and the idea that all human beings are created by God with inalienable rights. There's a fundamental contradiction there. Why didn't the slave owners, by virtue of their philosophy living in the United States, why did they just free all the slaves from day one? Why did they continue practicing slavery? Because it was useful to them. In many ways, it was more useful to maintain the institution of slavery than it was to recognize the incompatibility of slavery with their government.
Do you think it's possible to be a solipsist and be a moral, decent person?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah. Of course, I would. I think because I do not believe that someone is good or bad, right or wrong because of their ideas. I think that actions are what determine our goodness or our badness. Does that make sense?
Sure.
So, like, you can be a solipsist and have your own self-reifying consciousness as the expression for everything that you hold to be true. But if you're not out there like slaughtering millions of people in order to assert that, you're not really doing anything bad. Um, if, however, you're like Hitler or you're like Stalin, for example, and you view ideology and you view the way that people hold certain beliefs to be valuable in society against them, and the reason that you do that is because it is utilitarian for your own personal purposes, then yeah, I'd say that's pretty evil. That's an example of you placing yourself above all other human beings and thinking that all other human beings are like beneath you in some sort of a way. But solipsist philosophy does not suggest that at its core. Like
Uh,
in many ways, everyone could be a solipsist if we all. It's kind of like anarchism. We could all believe the world to be the product of our own self consciousness, and as long as we're not harming people, there's nothing really wrong with that happening.
okay, I'm a. I will email you the rest of these questions because I don't want to, take away too much more time. I know we don't have a lot more time left, but okay.
That's fine. That's fine. I do want. I think this next little bit will help clarify a few things, and I'll try to get through my notes, as quickly as possible. But I don't care if we go over time a little bit. I don't know if they like cut us off or anything. I don't think they do. Um, so let's think about. Let's kind of redraw things back a little bit to seeing ourselves as little young 20-year-old something Karl Marx sitting in these philosophy lectures, listening to his teacher Hegel profound about absolute truth and subjectivity, yada, yada, yada. So, the thesis for Marx leading into the 19th century, the 1800s, was this concept called intrinsic value. Have you ever heard of intrinsic value before?
Yeah, sure, like in a religious setting.
Okay. Economists at the time and still today will also assert that intrinsic value exists. They'd say, so intrinsic means inert or like natural. So this suggests that value is natural to certain things. For example, long before modern day currencies existed, and before civilizations found the means of like communicating with each other in advanced ways, human beings nevertheless valued things. They valued gold, they valued silver, they valued diamonds. Okay, and this is the same case regardless of where we go in the world. We could look at Mesopotamia, we could look at Africa, we could look at ancient China, or we could look at the Mesoamericans like the Inca, the Mexica, and the Native American groups that populated North America. All of those individuals, despite their disconnection with one another, they all valued gold, silver, and diamonds. Why?
Good question.
Most likely by their rarity, for one. But also, gold has a little bit of a luster to it. It sparkles when you get it in the sunlight. Silver is kind of the same, but a little bit less. But diamonds, they really shimmer when you put them in the light.
Hmm.
So, regardless of knowing the chemical properties of these things, human beings nevertheless valued them. So, they also valued them for different reasons, culturally. Like some groups valued gold as a currency, other groups valued gold for like decoration, bowls, jewelry, stuff like that. But one thing is for certain, they nevertheless have been valued since before we started writing down history, just like the discovery of fire. Intrinsic value as a theory dates back to Aristotle and even Confucius. I think Confucius wrote a few times on the idea of naturally imbued values. Um, Now, this doesn't mean to say that value is fixed per se. Value is always negotiable. It does, however, imply that things are naturally more valuable than others. For example, gold is generally considered to be more valuable than silver.
Hmm.
Correct? Would you agree with me?
Um, I mean, well, of course now, like in modern times, like by like economic standards, but like inherently or like intrinsically, I don't know. I mean, I guess it's easier to find silver. Maybe I don't even know if that's true, but
It as a rare earth metal. Silver is hard to find, but you will, on average, find more silver than you will gold,
hmm,
and you will find even less diamonds.
hmm,
So there's like the tiered category of rarity, and as such, that's kind of how they relate to each other. So at its core, intrinsic value suggests that there's fundamental about everything and their relationship to other things. The most important being that I can exchange them for each other. 1 pound of gold can equal 4 pounds of silver. 1 barrel of wheat can equal 5 Roman coins. 1 pound of beef can cost me $4 at the store. You see what I'm saying? Like everything can be related to each other as like an exchange,
hmm.
et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But such an assertion is extremely close to making an argument that scientists make about objects in the world. It is asserting that value is a property of things. Marx made a famous mocking joke of empirical science when he looked at intrinsic value. He said, quote, despite all of their efforts, chemists have never found value to be a physical property of diamonds. What do you think he means by that?
Um, well, I guess there's no like physical or like objectivity to like value. Like that's something that we create or come up with later.
Yeah, and in concluding that, he's basically saying so intrinsic value is bullshit. There's no reason for us to fiddle around with this idea of intrinsic value. We create the values. So, referring to the fact that diamond, according to science, is nothing but a bunch of condensed carbon atoms, there's not anything valuable about condensed carbon atoms until we introduce this idea of exchanging. So, Marx viewed intrinsic value as a thesis that needs that roadblock, like I mentioned before. It needs something to break the dominant consciousness that people surround intrinsic value with. They put so much faith into it. But he's saying, but it's so obvious that intrinsic value is bullshit. Why do people follow this concept so strictly? So he leaned on a concept called the labor theory of value in order to try and create this antithesis. And I know that it's 7:32. Are you on like a time crunch, or you good for like
Um,
another 5 minutes?
I have my first class at 8:30. I have time.
Okay, all right. So I'll just kind of try and wrap it up a little bit with the introduction then of the labor theory of value. The LTV, as it's sometimes abbreviated, was originally coined by this man, Adam Smith, in this book, The Wealth of Nations. If you take a U.S. history course, you're most certainly going to read sections of this book. This book was written at a time when England, pre Great Britain, was consolidating its colonial empire and trying to figure out the best way to maximize value. So here's what he did. Adam Smith noted that all the, quote, goods of the colonies should be appropriated and brought back to England where they could be valued based on their use. Tobacco is a very famous example here. I'm sure that you're aware of, if you've taken even a little bit of introductory American history, that tobacco was the first major export that the colonies could do in order to make money. It wasn't gold. They all came out here looking for gold, but what they ended up finding was the brown gold that was tobacco. So when the English set up their export of tobacco, they passed something called the Navigation Acts, and there's a series of them in the 1650s, 60s, and 70s. This act made it, quote, illegal to trade with anyone other than English merchants and stipulated that all tobacco grown in the colonies was not to be produced into smokable tobacco like pipe tobacco or cigarettes, but rather that should occur once the tobacco reaches England. Now, why would Adam Smith say that?
Why would Adam Smith say that?
Yeah, why should tobacco be forced to only be sold to England, and why can't the American colonies produce cigarettes? Why is it that it has to go to England first in order to do that?
I mean, it just, I kind of just, it sounds like, I don't know, like propaganda for like the crown or something.
You're right. It kind of is. So, but what's the reasoning behind that? In other words, why shouldn't the American colonies be allowed to sell to Spanish merchants?
Oh, to, make sure that that wealth is, going over to England instead of to, other countries.
Bingo. Hence the title of the book, The Wealth of Not People, The Wealth of Nations. This is a theory about how you make a nation wealthy. But also, why can't the American colonies roll? Like, I get it, we're going to force them to sell to England, but why can't the American colonies then roll cigarettes? The answer is that England wants its own working class in England to roll those cigarettes. Thus, you are creating a giant loop in which the American colonies are growing the tobacco and harvesting it, selling it to merchants, who are then selling it to factory owners in England, who are having workers roll them into cigarettes, and then those factory owners are selling those cigarettes worldwide, including back to the American colonies. What have they done? They have created a monopoly. They
Mm,
have created an absolute monopoly of tobacco.
that's so
And at
sick.
each
Oh my
point in the
gosh.
chain, what did you say? Sorry?
That's really not good.
No, no, it's not good. But Smith noted something very important here that ultimately undermined his whole position and influenced Karl Marx a lot. He said, the value of the tobacco when it's bought from the colonies and sold to those factories in England, that value cannot be the same. It can't. Like, we can't possibly pay the farmers the same value that we're going to then charge for the factory owner. Why? Because someone needs to make money at each transaction and sale of the tobacco. Someone needs to make a little bit of profit. So Adam Smith made a pretty profound observation. The reason that this value is advancing from person to person is that once you remove someone from the chain, let's say we remove the merchant, we have the tobacco farmer in America and we have the working class and the factory owner in England, but we've removed the merchant from the equation. Can the whole operation continue? No, it can't. It's destroyed by the removal of that person. So if the tobacco farmer can't get a profit for his tobacco, why would he sell it to an English merchant? If the English merchant can't get a profit by selling it to the factory owner, why would the merchant even engage in this whole process? And if the factory owner cannot sell those cigarettes on the global market for a higher value than he purchased the tobacco for, why would he be doing that at all? So, thus, this valualization of labor is occurring, according to Adam Smith. That it's people's working of the tobacco, the work that the farmer makes, the work that the merchant makes in sacrificing his time and energy to traverse the Atlantic Ocean, the work that the factory owner does in terms of building this factory and maintaining it and paying the workers, and the work of the workers themselves. All of it is the reason why this value is advanced. Does that make sense?
Uh huh. This is getting
I
serious.
know it is definitely getting close to the seriousness. So here's how we'll kind of wrap things up. So let's jump forward to Marx in the 1840s and 50s with that thesis on Feuerbach and the German ideology. Marx takes Smith's concept of the labor theory of value and he asserts that it existed as the antithesis to intrinsic value. Marx basically said it like this: a person works to transform natural wood into a table. The value that the table has must be more than the wood itself. How do we explain the advance in the value? It's human labor. I have taken time and energy out of my day and my physical being to take wood and make it into a table or a chair or a cup or whatever.
Um,
But to oh, go ahead, go ahead.
so is it possible to sort of like, I don't know if the word is correct, but like is it possible to sort of like fully democratize profit such that like there's no group or there's no party that's like, I guess like being like, I don't know, stolen from? Like can you like it's like I don't what's the words to use? Is there a way to sort of send back some of that profit downstream back to those like initial bottom laborers? Is that possible?
In theory, yes. But what I and many philosophers, and most certainly Marx, would suggest is that there is a reason not to do so. There is a reason why you don't want to empower your workers as such, because that goes against your own profits, that goes against your own livelihood as a business owner. You hear this every once in a while when people say, like, well, why don't you pay your workers more? Or why don't you provide health benefits and stuff like that? One of the most common answers that a business owner gives is a lean on intrinsic value. They say, hey, I took all the risk. Like, it's all my money. Like, I'm the one who fronted everything for this operation. So all of its value is technically mine. That is a very heavy assertion of intrinsic value. Like the Ford Motor Company saying, like, our workers do not produce cars. We produce cars and we pay workers for helping us to do so.
Hmm.
But according to the labor theory of value, that's all like, wait a minute. Like, even Adam Smith would say, if we remove the workers from your factory, Ford, are you going to be making any cars today? No, you're not. So
But I mean, like,
there is a way to try and do what you're suggesting. There is a way to try and democratize the market, but there isn't an impetus to do so by people who are in control of society.
but it is possible. Like, you can have like a practical, like functioning company like operate. Like that could happen.
Yeah, they're called they have a tax code to them, but it's basically no different from a like an employee owned business. New Belgium Brewing Company is a great example. It's a beer company based out of Colorado, and they pay all their workers not like how much time they've worked in the brewery off the clock. They pay their workers a percentage of the profits that the company makes every single quarter. So the workers can see their salaries go up if the company sees its profit margin go up. But if the company sees its profit margin slip down, then the people working at the brewery are also going to see their annual salaries go down. So there's both a positive and a negative to what you're suggesting. Like, yeah, it'd be great if people could be paid a lot more equally, according to how successful the business is. But that also carries with it the negativity that if the business starts to suffer, everyone in the business suffers. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, but that happens anyway, right? Like it's like what's it called? Like they oh my god, they like like they socialize the losses and like they capitalize on the gains or something like that.
Yeah, you're not wrong. You're not wrong. But I guess what I'm trying to get at is that there's the reason why such companies are rarer than the dominant capitalist mode of productivity is simply because though, like, think of, I just described New Belgium Brewing Company. Have you ever heard of them?
No.
They make Fat Tire. If you've ever heard of that beer before, but there's right or there's the answer right there. You haven't heard of them. They're a small mini operation in Denver, Colorado. And unless you are like a beer aficionado or you really like craft beers or something like that, you have no reason to care about this employee owned business that's in Denver.
Hmm.
What forms and what commodities around you do you have a much more direct relationship with? The table that's in front of you, the building that you're in, your bed, etc. Those things most likely were not produced using this kind of communitarian method. Most likely they were produced using a basic capitalist model of private ownership and paying workers by the hour to produce these things.
Hmm.
Make sense?
Yeah, yeah, it does. Yeah, so many questions. But I guess maybe I should email you the questions. Because
Yeah, email me the questions. I think what's best to do right now is to think about when would be the next time you would like to meet up, if you would like to.
for sure, we could do the same time next week if you're available.
So next week is going to be difficult because it's my move week. These next 2 weeks, um, I mean, as much as I would like to be available on Monday of next week, I don't know if I'll have my PC set up at my new place. Um, but if you remember, Tuesdays and Wednesdays and Fridays are pretty, open for me in the afternoons. I know that Friday of next week is not this upcoming week, but the week after that is Halloween. So I think the best day for me would probably be Wednesday, the last week of October. If you would like to meet before that, it would have to be before this Friday because it's on Friday that my family, my brother is coming out to help me move. And then basically for like 4 days straight, we're just going to be moving stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I could do Wednesday afternoon. Like, you mean on the 29th?
Yes, the 29th.
Yep, I could do
Which time works for you? Because I know that we're on the same time zone.
that. Oh, sorry.
No
um,
problem.
my last class ends at like 4:15 on Wednesday, so like anytime between 4:15 and like 10 o'clock is when I go to sleep. So
Okay. So how about 5 o'clock then?
yep, that works.
Okay. Then you'll probably see a different background when I log in. But yeah, so we'll pick up then at about 5 o'clock on the 29th, and it will be the kind of goal to start off on okay, Mark's called intrinsic value bullshit. Now, what do we do with this? How do we convince people, just like the scientists had to do? How do we go convince the school of philosophy that this idea has any semblance and makes sense?
Gotcha.
So but okay, well, it was great meeting with you again. I really like we kind of have our own little dialectic going back and forth in terms of evolving the discussion from one topic to another. So I think that's very good. But yeah, this has been very productive.
Is there any homework you have for me or any assigned reading?
Yeah, I'm going to shoot you sections of Karl Marx's thesis on Feuerbach,
Hmm.
which is his dissertation. And it's going to kind of be supplemental with like little notes by me. But I'll have that to you probably by either the end of today or early tomorrow.
Awesome. And like, do you have maybe like Cash App or something? Like, because I want to like compensate you for this extra time.
Oh, you don't have to do that. Don't worry about that. No, 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 no. No, that's not necessary. I'm an educator. This is my job, so I'm not concerned about that. What's more important to me is that you're getting something out of this.
I appreciate it. I really appreciate it. So,
Well, all right, then you have a good rest of your Monday, and I look forward to talking to you on the 29th and getting your email of questions.
okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Have a good class.
You too. Oh, well, good day.
Yeah, take it easy. Bye.